The air hung heavy and sweet, with the scent of lilies and something else, something cloying and artificial that I couldn't quite place, but which I knew was supposed to symbolize joy. It was the night before Sarah's wedding, and I was standing in a ridiculously overpriced hotel suite, looking out over the city lights, each tiny spark a distant, indifferent eye. Tomorrow, those lights would bear witness to a spectacle, a carefully choreographed performance that had been years in the making. And I, the quiet, overlooked older sister, was about to play the starring role, though Sarah, the bride-to-be, had absolutely no idea. She thought she was the star, always had. The irony, you see, was so thick, you could cut it with the dullest butter knife. Sarah, my little sister, the golden child, the one who could charm the birds from the trees and the money from your wallet, was about to have her perfect day. And I was going to shatter it, not with a bang, but with a series of quiet, undeniable truths. It wasn't about vengeance, not entirely. It was about justice, about reclaiming a life that had been systematically dismantled. Peace, by agonizing peace, by the very person who was supposed to be family. I closed my eyes, the city lights blurring behind my eyelids, and let the memories wash over me. It didn't start with a dramatic flourish, no movie-style revelation. It began subtly, like a hairline crack in a perfectly painted wall. The first sign was a credit card bill that arrived in my mailbox, addressed to me, but for a card I'd never applied for. It was a store card, for a high-end boutique I'd only ever window-shopped. My initial reaction was confusion, then annoyance. Identity theft was a thing, of course, but it felt so distant, so impersonal. I called the store, then the bank. They were polite, apologetic, and assured me it would be sorted. They flagged the account, initiated an investigation. I thought that was the end of it. Oh, how naive I was. That was just the prologue. A few months later, another letter arrived, this time from a different bank. A loan application denied. Denied? Because my credit score had plummeted. My credit score, which I'd meticulously nurtured since I was 18, had apparently taken a nosedive into the Mariana Trench. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the edges of my calm. This wasn't a random store card anymore. This was serious. This was my financial future, my ability to rent an apartment, to buy a car, to exist as an independent adult, being actively sabotaged. I spent weeks on the phone, navigating automated systems, explaining my situation to a rotating cast of indifferent customer service representatives. Each conversation was a fresh stab of frustration. They asked me about addresses I'd never lived at, purchases I'd never made, accounts I'd never opened. The pattern was horrifyingly consistent. Every fraudulent transaction, every new account, every missed payment that wasn't mine, pointed to a specific geographical area, the town where Sarah lived, some 300 miles away. It was a suspicion I fought against with every fiber of my being. Not Sarah, not my sister, the little girl with the gap-toothed smile who used to follow me around like a shadow, the one I'd protected from bullies, the one I'd shared my secrets with. It couldn't be her. But the evidence, cold and irrefutable, began to pile up like bodies in a forgotten war. The addresses, the timing, the little details that only someone intimately familiar with my life would know. The dates of birth, the mother's maiden name, even my childhood pet's name, all used as security questions. Sarah knew all of those. She knew everything. The first time I confronted her, it was over the phone, my voice trembling with a mixture of fear and disbelief. I tried to be gentle, to offer an out, a chance for her to explain, to apologize. I said something like, "Sarah, look, I'm having some really serious issues with my credit, and there are some things showing up that are just, I don't understand." I mentioned the address, the town. Her response was a masterpiece of feigned innocence, a performance worthy of an Oscar. She sounded genuinely concerned, her voice laced with what I now recognize as manipulative sympathy. "Oh my goodness," she said. "That's awful. Are you okay? What can I do to help?" She even offered to look into it for me, bless her heart. I remember a small, desperate part of me wanting to believe her. wanting to push the ugly truth back into the dark corner of my mind. But the truth, once glimpsed, is a persistent thing. It gnaws at you. It keeps you awake at night. I started digging deeper, downloading my full credit reports from all 3 bureaus. What I found was a tapestry of deceit, woven with threads of my stolen identity. Credit cards, personal loans, even a small car loan, all in my name, all with balances I didn't owe, all opened and managed by Sarah. She wasn't just using my name, she was living through my name, building a financial life on the ruins of mine. The scale of it was breathtaking. Thousands of dollars. Tens of thousands. It wasn't a one-off mistake, a moment of desperation. This was a sustained, calculated campaign. For nearly 5 years, Sarah had been systematically impersonating me. While I was struggling to pay my own bills, working 2 jobs, saving every penny, she was apparently living it up, charging designer clothes, exotic vacations, expensive dinners, all on my dime, or rather on my credit. I confronted her again, this time in person. I drove the 300 miles, my stomach churning with a toxic cocktail of dread and fury. I brought printouts, bank statements, credit reports, a mountain of undeniable proof. We met at a neutral coffee shop, a place bustling, reception hall, all now monuments to a spectacular failure. A strange emptiness settled within me. For so long, the pursuit of this moment had consumed my every thought, every action. It had been the driving force that kept me going through the darkest days after our family's financial collapse, after I discovered the extent of Sarah's betrayal. I had spent months, nearly a year, meticulously gathering evidence, cultivating informants, feeding information to the right channels, ensuring that Julian's house of cards would fall, and that Sarah would be caught in the wreckage. I had watched her flaunt her engagement ring, heard her plans for a life of luxury, seen her dismiss our father's struggles with a wave of her hand, all while knowing the truth. She had not just squandered her own inheritance, but had actively siphoned funds from our father's struggling company, believing she was smarter, more deserving. She had convinced him to invest in Julian's schemes, promising a quick return that would save the business, only to lead it to utter destruction. The weight of our father's broken spirit had been a constant companion, a silent accusation that fueled my resolve. He had worked his entire life to build something, to provide for us, and Sarah, in her reckless pursuit of more, had destroyed it all. I had lost my own savings, my future plans, everything because of her. But unlike her, I had chosen not to wallow. I had chosen to act. Now, as the guests awkwardly began to disperse, some offering condolences, others simply escaping the mortifying spectacle, I felt a peculiar blend of triumph and exhaustion. The cold, hard satisfaction was there, a deep-seated hum of vindication. But beneath it, a faint echo of the old me, the sister who once looked up to Sarah, whispered a soft, mournful tune. It was a lament for what we had lost, for the sisterhood that had been irrevocably broken, for the family that would never be whole again. But the whisper was faint, easily overridden by the roar of justice. I had promised myself that I would not be the one left to pick up the pieces of Sarah's self-inflicted chaos again. This time she would face the consequences alone. I slowly made my way towards the exit, blending into the stream of departing guests. No one noticed me, the quiet bridesmaid, slipping away from the wreckage. My face was still impassive, my expression carefully neutral. I glanced back once, seeing Sarah still huddled on the altar steps, her mother weeping beside her, her father standing over them, a shattered patriarch. My eyes lingered on Sarah for a moment longer. She was no longer the radiant goddess, but a broken figure, stripped bare of her illusions. This was her unblemished beginning, indeed, but it was the beginning of her true reckoning, not the fairy tale she had envisioned. And I, her forgotten sister, had orchestrated every precise, devastating beat. As I stepped out into the crisp afternoon air, leaving the opulent, now tainted, venue behind, I felt a sense of lightness, a burden lifted. The weight of betrayal, The years of silent suffering had been transmuted into this singular, public act of vengeance. It was a dark, dangerous path I had walked, but I had walked it with purpose. My phone, tucked discreetly into the inner pocket of my tailored bridesmaid dress, vibrated. It was a familiar, almost imperceptible tremor, a prearranged signal. No name, no message, just the silent confirmation that the secondary phase of my meticulously crafted plan was now in motion. I did not need to check it. I knew what it meant. The carefully curated digital breadcrumbs, the irrefutable evidence I had spent years gathering and then strategically placing, were now spreading across the internet, a wildfire of truth Sarah could no longer contain. I reached the rental car, a nondescript silver sedan parked several blocks away, far from the valet parking and the prying eyes of the wedding guests. The air outside was cool and clean, a stark contrast to the suffocating opulence of the ballroom, now surely a scene of utter chaos. I shed the silk jacket of my dress, tossing it onto the passenger seat with a faint sigh of relief. The fabric, chosen by Sarah, felt like a costume, a disguise I had worn for the final act. Now, I was shedding the skin of the forgotten sister, stepping into the unburdened self I had fought so hard to reclaim. The drive was silent, save for the low hum of the engine. I navigated the familiar streets of the city, the very streets where Sarah and I had grown up, where her triumphs had always overshadowed my quiet existence. Each turn, each traffic light, was a small victory, a step further away from the gilded cage of my past. My mind, usually a whirlwind of strategizing and suppressed emotion, felt eerily calm, a still lake reflecting the setting sun. The knot in my stomach, a constant companion for as long as I could remember, had finally unraveled. I thought of Sarah, still undoubtedly reeling. The image of her broken figure on the altar steps, her face stripped of its usual artifice, was burned into my memory. It was not a moment of joy for me, not in the way one might expect. There was no triumphant cackle, no wild exultation. Instead, it was a quiet, profound sense of completion. A debt had been paid, a balance restored. Justice, in its most personal and brutal form, had been served. My destination was a small, tastefully furnished apartment I had rented months ago, under an assumed name, a sanctuary waiting patiently for this very moment. It was impersonal, devoid of any personal touches, a blank canvas for my new life. As I unlocked the door, the silence of the empty rooms enveloped me, a comforting embrace. I walked to the window, looking out at the city lights, twinkling in the twilight. It was a beautiful, indifferent world, and for the first time I felt truly a part of it, rather than a shadow observing from the periphery. I changed into comfortable clothes, a simple dark sweater and jeans. The bridesmaid dress lay in a heap on the floor, a discarded symbol of my past. I would dispose of it later, along with all other remnants of my former identity. My old life, the one tethered to Sarah and our dysfunctional family, was gone. This was my exodus. I retrieved my personal phone from my bag. It had been off during the wedding, a deliberate choice to maintain focus. As I powered it on, a cascade of notifications flooded the screen. Missed calls, dozens of them, mostly from my mother, a few from my father, and a surprising number from various distant relatives and acquaintances who had likely heard the rumors swirling through the wedding venue. There were also countless texts, a mix of frantic inquiries, thinly veiled accusations, and a few expressions of shock and sympathy, though I knew the latter were likely disingenuous. I scrolled past them all, my gaze steady. I had anticipated this, of course. The immediate aftermath would be a storm of outrage and confusion. I ignored the calls, knowing any conversation would be futile, a torrent of emotional manipulation I was no longer willing to endure. My family operated on a currency of guilt and obligation, a currency I had finally declared worthless. Then I saw it. A news alert, prominently displayed. Local socialite wedding ends. In Scandal. The headline was sensational, as expected. I clicked on it, my finger steady. The article, already updated multiple times, detailed the abrupt halt of Sarah's wedding, the shocking accusations leveled against the groom, and the subsequent chaos. It mentioned an anonymous source providing irrefutable evidence, including video footage and damning emails. My work, beautifully executed. The comment section was a predictable cesspool of judgment, speculation, and schadenfreude. Some defended Sarah, calling it a cruel hoax. Others condemned her, pointing to her past behavior, a history I knew all too well. It was a public dissection, a tearing down of the carefully constructed facade Sarah had presented to the world. And I, the quiet architect, watched it all unfold with a detached interest, like observing a complex chemical reaction. I allowed myself a small, private smile. It was not a smile of malice, but of deep, quiet satisfaction. This was not about destroying Sarah for the sake of destruction. It was about exposing the truth, about stripping away the layers of deceit that had defined our family dynamic for so long. It was about reclaiming my own narrative, one that had been consistently overshadowed and dismissed. I remembered a specific incident, a memory that often fueled my resolve. It was years ago, during my final year of university. I had been working tirelessly on a research project, something I was truly passionate about, a precursor to my current career path. Sarah, meanwhile, had been floundering, barely passing her courses, more interested in parties and social climbing. She had needed a high-grade essay for a crucial class. Our parents, ever eager to smooth Sarah's path, had subtly pressured me, implying it would be a great act of sisterly love if I could just help her out. Help her out meant writing it for her. I had resisted at first, but the constant pressure, the guilt trips, the subtle suggestions that I was being selfish had worn me down. I had poured my heart and intellect into writing an original, well-researched paper for Sarah, sacrificing my own study time. She submitted it, received an A, and took all the credit, even receiving praise from our parents for her supposed academic prowess. When I tried to gently suggest to my mother that I had done most of the work, she had simply waved it away, saying Sarah needed the boost more, and that I was always so capable anyway. It was a pattern, one of many, where my achievements were minimized, and my efforts were redirected to prop up Sarah's image. That specific incident, the theft of my intellectual labor, had solidified a quiet resentment, a seed of rebellion. And then there was the larger betrayal, the one that had truly set me on this path. The details of that were too raw, too deeply ingrained to revisit lightly, but it involved a trust so profound, so fundamental, that its shattering had left an irreparable fissure in my perception of family. It was not just about a boyfriend, as the public might assume from the wedding scandal. It was about a deeper, more insidious violation of loyalty and love, a calculated act of cruelty that had left me utterly broken. Sarah had not merely stolen something from me. She had stolen a piece of my soul, convinced me it was worthless, and then paraded her spoils. I walked into the small kitchen, brewed a cup of herbal tea, and sat at the counter, watching the city lights. The silence was profound, broken only by the gentle hum of the refrigerator. For years, my life had been characterized by a constant internal noise, a cacophony of grievances, calculations, and suppressed emotions. Now it was quiet. The relief was palpable, almost overwhelming. I knew the road ahead would not be entirely smooth. There would be repercussions, attempts at reconciliation, perhaps even threats. My family, particularly my mother, would not simply let me disappear. Their entire identity was wrapped up in maintaining a perfect facade, and I had just ripped it to shreds. I anticipated the desperate phone calls, the tearful pleas, the manipulative attempts to draw me back into their orbit. But I was prepared. I had built a fortress around my heart, brick by painful brick. I had also taken steps to ensure my personal safety and financial independence. The money I had saved, squirreled away from years of careful budgeting and shrewd investments was more than enough to sustain me for a long time. My professional skills were in demand, and I had already secured a remote position with a company across the country, one that offered anonymity and a fresh start. My apartment was temporary, a stepping stone. Soon I would be truly gone, untraceable, a phantom in their lives. I picked up my phone again, not to check messages, but to delete them. I systematically cleared my call logs, text message threads, and any digital footprints that connected me to my past. It was a cleansing ritual, a severing of ties. The only contacts I kept were those essential for my new life, people who knew nothing of Sarah or my family, or the intricate web of deceit I had just untangled. As the last message disappeared, a sense of finality settled over me. This was it. The end of one chapter, the beginning of another. There was no turning back, no lingering doubt. I had made my choice, walked my path, and now I stood on the precipice of a future entirely of my own making. The tea was warm in my hands, a comforting heat. I savored the quiet moment, the taste of freedom on my tongue. The world might perceive me as a villain, a vengeful sister. But I knew the truth. I was an avenger, yes, but also a survivor. I had simply chosen to fight back, to reclaim my dignity, to carve out a space for myself in a world that had tried to erase me. I closed my eyes, picturing the vast expanse of the night sky outside, the countless stars, each a distant sun. I was one of them now, no longer eclipsed by a brighter, more favored star. I was my own light, finally shining, and that, I realized, was the most profound triumph of all. The weight of betrayal had been lifted, replaced by the exhilarating lightness of being truly, unequivocally free. The path ahead was unknown, but for the first time in my life it was mine to forge. I went to the bedroom, pulled a small, worn journal from my bag. It was where I had meticulously documented every slight, every betrayal, every calculated move Sarah had made against me. It was a chronicle of my pain, but also a testament to my resilience. I flipped through the pages, seeing the careful handwriting, the dates, the details that had once consumed me. Now, they felt distant, like relics of a past life. I took a deep breath, then tore out the pages, one by one. The crisp tearing sound was oddly satisfying. I gathered the shredded paper, then went to the kitchen and dropped them into the sink. I took a lighter from a drawer, a small, silver one I rarely used. With a flick of my thumb, a small flame danced. I touched it to the paper. The flames licked greedily at the edges, curling the paper, turning the words into ash. The smoke rose, a thin, ephemeral plume carrying away the last vestiges of my old wounds. I watched, mesmerized, as the past turned to nothingness, dissolving into the air. When the last ember died, I rinsed the sink, washing away the fine gray powder. Clean slate. The next morning, I awoke to the soft glow of dawn. The city outside was stirring, but my apartment remained a haven of quiet. I felt refreshed, a deep, restorative sleep having finally claimed me. I made coffee, strong and black, and sat by the window, watching the sun climb higher, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. My phone remained silent. I had muted all notifications, choosing to control when and how I engaged with the outside world. I knew the story would be everywhere, the scandal growing with each passing hour. My family would be in damage control mode, frantically trying to spin the narrative, to protect Sarah's tarnished image. But it was too late. The truth, once unleashed, could not be put back in its cage. I spent the morning organizing my belongings, which were few. My life had been streamlined, pared down to essentials. I had learned to live with little, to value freedom over possessions. The few sentimental items I owned were packed carefully in a small box, ready for my permanent relocation. Everything else was disposable. Around midday, I received a text message from an unknown number. It simply read, "They're looking for you. Be careful." It was from the contact who had helped disseminate the information, a discreet individual I had hired through a network of trusted intermediaries. I didn't reply. A confirmation was unnecessary. I knew they would be looking. My mother would be the most relentless. Her calls would escalate, her messages growing increasingly desperate and accusatory. She would try to appeal to my sense of family, to the bond she always claimed we shared. Despite her consistent favoritism towards Sarah, she would paint me as the villain, the cruel sister who had destroyed her own flesh and blood. But her words held no power over me anymore. The emotional blackmail had lost its currency. I imagined her frantic calls to my father, his stern, disappointed voice, the weight of his expectations. He would see this as a personal failing, a stain on the family name he so meticulously cultivated. He would be angry, not at Sarah for her deception, but at me for exposing it. That was their way. Protect the image, no matter the cost to truth or individual well-being. Sarah herself, I predicted, would be consumed by rage and self-pity. She would lash out, blame everyone but herself. She would likely try to discredit me, to paint me as unstable, jealous, or mentally unwell. It was her go-to tactic, one I had anticipated and prepared for. My carefully constructed digital trail, my consistent and rational behavior leading up to the event, would stand in stark contrast to any wild accusations she might hurl. I had meticulously gathered evidence of her manipulative behavior, not just the wedding scandal, but a pattern of deceit that stretched back for years. Should she choose to escalate, I had further ammunition, carefully stored and ready to be deployed, but I hoped it wouldn't come to that. My goal was not perpetual warfare, but a clean break. My flight was booked for the following week. Until then, I would maintain a low profile, preparing for my departure. I would tie up any loose ends, ensure my new identity was fully established, and sever all remaining connections to my past. The apartment rental agreement would expire, the burner phone would be discarded, and I would vanish, a ghost of a sister, leaving behind only the ripples of truth. The lightness I had felt yesterday had deepened into a quiet resolve. The burden was truly gone. I was no longer defined by my sister's shadow, or my family's expectations, or the pain of their betrayals. I was simply me, whole and unburdened, ready to step into a future of my own design. The path was dark, as I had acknowledged, but it was all Malai Taima's path. And that made all the difference. The week that followed was a meticulously orchestrated ballet of erasure. Each day was a step further away from the person I had been, a careful dismantling of a life that no longer served me. My apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a stage being struck. I moved with a quiet efficiency, my actions devoid of sentimentality. Clothes were sorted, not for future use, but for donation bins or the shredder. Documents, bank statements, utility bills, anything bearing my old name or address were fed into a cross-cut shredder until they were nothing but confetti, then mixed with household trash, distributed across several different bins in different neighborhoods over several nights. No single piece of evidence would remain. My digital footprint was next. Social media accounts, already dormant, were systematically deleted, email accounts were closed. Cloud storage was emptied, and accounts terminated. It was a digital cremation, leaving no trace for anyone to follow. I paid bills in cash, avoided using credit cards, and minimized any interaction that might create a record. The burner phone, my only link to the outside world for urgent matters, remained silent, tucked away in a drawer. I checked it once a day, expecting perhaps a frantic message from my sister, a desperate attempt to salvage her reputation, but it remained dark. The silence was a relief, but also a tension, a waiting game. She was either too stunned, too ashamed, or too cunning to react immediately. I preferred to believe the latter, maintaining my vigilance. I spent hours walking, exploring the city as if seeing it for the first time, imprinting its final image onto my memory before it became a ghost town in my past. I visited my favorite quiet cafe one last time, savoring the bitter coffee and the anonymous hum of conversation around me. I walked along the river, feeling the cool breeze on my face. A final sensory farewell to a place that had held so much of my life, both good and bad. There was no sadness, only a deep, abiding sense of closure. Each step was a severing, a conscious act of detachment. The new identity was taking shape beautifully. The new bank accounts were active, the new phone number established, the new email address ready. I had even adopted a subtle change in my appearance, a new haircut, a different style of glasses, clothes that leaned into a more neutral, less distinctive palette. Not a disguise, but an evolution, a softening of edges that made me blend effortlessly into a crowd. I practiced my new name, my new backstory, in front of the mirror, ensuring the words flowed naturally, without hesitation. It was a role I was born to play, the role of a woman starting fresh, unburdened by history. The apartment itself became a shell. I packed a single, unassuming suitcase with the bare essentials for my new life. A few changes of clothes, toiletries, the crucial documents for my new identity, and a small, well-worn journal. Everything else was either donated, discarded, or left behind. On the final evening, the apartment was stark, echoing. The furniture remained, a silent testament to a life lived there, but all personal touches were gone. The walls were bare, the shelves empty. It felt less like moving out, and more like vacating a space that had never truly been mine. I ate a simple meal, packed a sandwich for the journey, and then sat in the quiet darkness, listening to the city outside. It was a profound solitude, not lonely, but deeply centering. The night before the flight, I slept soundly, something I hadn't done consistently in years. There was no anxiety, no lingering doubts, only the quiet hum of anticipation, the certainty that I was making the right choice. My alarm woke me before dawn. I dressed in comfortable, anonymous clothing, double-checked my bag, and then took one last look around the empty apartment. A faint scent of old coffee and dust lingered in the air. I left the keys on the kitchen counter, a silent surrender of ownership, and closed the door behind me for the final time. The click of the lock was definitive, a period at the end of a long, convoluted sentence. The taxi ride to the airport was uneventful, the driver oblivious to the seismic shift occurring in his passenger's life. The city was still waking up, a soft gray light just beginning to appear on the horizon. At the airport, I moved through the crowds with a sense of quiet purpose. My new passport felt solid in my hand, the name on it a promise of anonymity. Security checks were a mere formality. I was just another face in the throng, another traveler embarking on a journey. The anonymity was liberating, a cloak of invisibility I had craved for so long. Boarding the plane felt like stepping onto a portal. I found my window seat, settled in, and watched as the ground crew prepared the aircraft. The engines roared to life, a powerful symphony of departure. As the plane taxied down the runway and then lifted into the sky, I pressed my forehead against the cool glass, watching the city shrink below me. It became a patchwork quilt, then a distant smudge, and finally, nothing at all but the vast expanse of clouds. A deep breath escaped me, a physical release of years of tension. The burden was truly gone. The flight itself was long, a liminal space suspended between past and future. I read, I slept, I stared out at the endless blue. My thoughts were clear, unclouded by the usual anxieties. I reflected on my sister, not with anger, but with a detached understanding. Her actions had been a catalyst, an unintended gift of freedom. My family, too, faded into the background, their expectations and judgments now powerless to touch me. I was no longer beholden to their narrative, no longer defined by their perceptions. Landing in the new city was exhilarating. The air felt different, cleaner, imbued with the promise of newness. The language was unfamiliar, a melodic cascade of sounds that further reinforced my sense of being an outsider, a blank slate. I navigated the airport with ease, collected my single bag, and found my way to the small, pre-booked apartment. It was modest, clean, and entirely impersonal. Perfect. The first few days were a blur of practicalities. I unpacked my few belongings, arranged the small kitchen, and familiarized myself with the neighborhood. I bought groceries, learned the local phrases for basic interactions, and explored the nearby streets. Each morning, I woke up to a silence that was profoundly peaceful, undisturbed by the ghosts of my past. I used my new name, answered to it without hesitation, and began to weave the threads of my new backstory into everyday conversations. It felt natural, a second skin. I found a small, local cafe where I could sit and observe, slowly absorbing the rhythm of the city. I started a new journal, not to record the past, but to document the present, the unfolding of this new, unscripted chapter. The pages were blank, ready to be filled with my own experiences, my own choices, uninfluenced by anyone else. The path ahead was still dark in its unknown specifics, but it was no longer daunting. It was an invitation. Weeks turned into a month. The initial vigilance I had felt regarding my sister's potential retaliation slowly receded. There had been no contact, no sign of anyone trying to reach me, no digital breadcrumbs leading back to my new life. The silence was absolute. It confirmed my success. My carefully deployed ammunition had been unnecessary, a testament to the effectiveness of my preemptive strike, or perhaps to her own incapacitation by the truth. Either way, I was free. I secured a remote job, leveraging my skills in a way that allowed me flexibility and independence. The work was engaging, but also served as a means to an end, providing stability without demanding too much of my personal identity. I began to explore local classes, learning the language more formally, immersing myself in the culture. I made acquaintances, not friends, maintaining a careful distance, enjoying the pleasant superficiality of new interactions. There was a quiet satisfaction in building a life from the ground up, brick by meticulously placed brick. The woman I had been, the one entangled in family dramas and betrayals, felt like a character from a book I had finished reading. I could recall her experiences, her pain, her struggles, but they no longer defined me. They were footnotes, not the main narrative. I was simply me, whole and unburdened, designing my days, choosing my path. The darkness of the unknown was not an abyss, but a canvas, waiting for me to paint my own future. And that made all the difference. The past was a closed book, its cover firmly shut, its pages unread by anyone but me. My future was an open sky, vast and full of possibility, stretching out before me, limitless and mine alone. The days unfolded with a gentle rhythm, each sunrise a fresh affirmation of my chosen existence. I relished the small rituals, the first cup of strong coffee on my small balcony, watching the city awaken, the murmurs of a language I was slowly mastering drifting up from the streets below. My apartment, sparsely furnished but filled with light, was a sanctuary, a testament to my ability to create comfort and beauty from scratch. I had chosen every piece, every book, every plant, each item, a deliberate contribution to the atmosphere of peace I cultivated. It was a space that breathed my intentions, a quiet echo of my inner landscape. The scent of fresh linen, the subtle aroma of brewing tea, the faint, comforting fragrance of the local herbs I used in my cooking, all contributed to an environment that felt uniquely mine, a haven from the world, and from the echoes of a life I had purposefully left behind. My language skills progressed steadily, moving beyond mere functionality to a more nuanced understanding. The language, at first a challenging puzzle, slowly transformed into a living, breathing entity. I moved beyond the rote memorization of phrases, beyond the careful construction of sentences, into a realm where I could feel the nuances, the unspoken meanings, the subtle inflections that carried so much of the local spirit. Conversations with shopkeepers became less transactional and more like miniature exchanges of life. The old woman who sold me bread, her hands gnarled with age, would sometimes share a small anecdote about her day, or offer a piece of unsolicited wisdom, enough that she couldn't make a scene, but quiet enough for us to talk. I laid it all out, my voice carefully modulated, trying to stay calm even as my hands shook. I said, "Sarah, I know it's you, I have all the evidence." The mask slipped then, just for a second. A flash of something cold and reptilian in her eyes, quickly replaced by indignation. How dare I accuse her? Her own sister? Did I know how much she loved me? How could I even think such a thing? She started crying, real tears, the kind that always got her out of trouble with our parents. She accused me of being jealous, of making things up, of trying to ruin her life. She even suggested I was having some kind of mental breakdown. It was gaslighting of the highest order, a masterclass in deflection. And the worst part? Our parents, bless their hearts, fell for it. Sarah had always been their favorite, the delicate one, the one who needed more attention, more protection. When I tearfully presented my case to them, showing them the documents, explaining the financial ruin I was facing, they listened with worried expressions. But then Sarah called, crying about my accusations, about how I was hurting her, and suddenly, the narrative shifted. They told me I was being too hard on her, that she would never do something like that I must be mistaken, confused. Perhaps I'd forgotten opening those accounts myself. Perhaps I was just stressed. They suggested I see a therapist. That's when something inside me snapped. Not in an explosive, dramatic way, but quietly, like a tightly wound spring finally giving way. The betrayal wasn't just Sarah's. It was the entire family's. Their inability or unwillingness to see the truth, to protect me, to even listen to me, solidified a cold, hard resolve in my heart. I was on my own. And if I was on my own, then I could play by my own rules. I spent the next year in a kind of quiet hell. My credit was destroyed. I couldn't get a loan, couldn't rent an apartment without a co-signer, couldn't even get a decent cell phone plan. Every aspect of my life was impacted. I moved back into a shared house, scraping by while simultaneously trying to untangle the financial knot Sarah had woven. It was an uphill battle, a constant stream of phone calls, disputes, fraud reports. The banks were slow, the process tedious, and the emotional toll immense. I felt like a ghost, my identity stolen, my very existence diluted and distorted by someone else's greed. But during that year, a plan began to form, slowly at first, then with increasing clarity and precision. Sarah had taken so much from me, my financial stability, my peace of mind, my trust in family. She had made me a pariah, someone to be pitied or dismissed. Well, I decided, if she wanted a show, I would give, and I found myself understanding not just her words, but the warmth behind them. The young man at the bookstore, always with a new recommendation, would discuss the merits of a particular author, and I could engage, offering my own hesitant but increasingly confident opinions. This linguistic bridge opened up the city in ways I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just about navigating daily life, it was about connecting with the soul of the place. I found myself not merely existing within its ancient walls, but truly inhabiting them. The city, once a collection of impressive but silent monuments, began to whisper its stories directly into my ear. It was a gradual awakening, like a long dormant sense finally stirring to life. Each new word I learned, each idiomatic expression I grasped, was a key turning in a lock, revealing another chamber of understanding. My interactions expanded beyond the transactional. My landlady, a stern but ultimately kind woman named Alara, who initially communicated with me through a series of gestures and resigned sighs, started to share small details of her day. She would describe the antics of her grandchildren, or complain good-naturedly about the rising price of olives, and I would listen, offering what I hoped were appropriate responses. Her approval, a rare and precious commodity, felt like a true mark of acceptance. The neighborhood children, who once regarded me with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion, now greeted me with boisterous shouts and flashing smiles. They would race alongside me as I walked through the narrow lanes, their bare feet slapping against the ancient cobblestones, vying for my attention, eager to share a newly learned word or a secret hiding place. Their games, initially impenetrable, slowly revealed their rules and rituals to me. I learned to distinguish between the various calls of their hide-and-seek, to anticipate the trajectory of their crudely fashioned leather balls, and to offer the appropriate encouraging cheer or commiserating sigh. They became my informal, energetic tutors, correcting my pronunciation with unself-conscious glee, and introducing me to the colorful slang that no textbook dared to print. My language acquisition, once a solitary and arduous task, transformed into a vibrant communal effort. Alara's kitchen became a classroom, her daily chores a practical lesson. As she kneaded dough for the morning bread, her hands moving with a practiced rhythm that spoke of generations, she would narrate her life, her family's history intertwined with the very stones of the village. Her voice, a low melodic hum, painted pictures of generations past, of harvests bountiful and lean, of loves found and lost beneath the same constellations that now glittered above us. She spoke of the old ways, the traditions that bound the community together, the unspoken rules of respect and reciprocity that governed every interaction. I learned about the significance of the morning dew collected from certain herbs, the proper method for mending a fishing net, the precise moment to sow the winter wheat. It was an education far richer and more nuanced than any academic text could ever provide, a living history breathed into existence, with every rhythmic thud of her hands against the yielding dough. My role in the kitchen evolved from mere observer to active participant. Soon I was not just watching Alara, but mimicking her movements, clumsy at first, then gaining a nascent confidence. I learned to separate the chaff from the grain, to knead the rising dough with a practiced rhythm that mirrored Alara's own, feeling the subtle changes in its texture beneath my palms. My fingers, once accustomed only to the smooth surfaces of parchment and the cool metal of a pen, now understood the rough embrace of burlap, the slick feel of fresh fish, the delicate tearing of herbs. I learned the names of plants I had never seen before, their medicinal properties, their culinary uses, their place in the village's tapestry of belief. Alara taught me how to coax flavor from the simplest ingredients, how to make a hearty stew from root vegetables and wild mushrooms, how to preserve fruits in honey and make cheeses that aged with a complexity that surprised my city-bred palate. The kitchen became my classroom, the village my living textbook. I rose before dawn, the air crisp and clean, to help Alara prepare the morning meal. We would work in comfortable silence, punctuated by the gentle clatter of pottery and the crackle of the small fire that warmed the hearth. The first hint of dawn, a faint gray wash, would soon bleed through the single window, chasing away the lingering shadows that danced in the corners. Alara, her face etched with the wisdom of countless sunrises, moved with an economy of motion that spoke of long practice, her hands deft as she measured grains for porridge or sliced cured meat. I watched her, absorbing not just the techniques but the quiet reverence she held for each ingredient, each task. It was not merely cooking. It was a ritual, a communion with the earth and the cycle of sustenance. After the morning meal, shared with the first few villagers who stirred early, their eyes still heavy with sleep, but quick to offer a nod or a soft greeting, my days unfolded with a rhythm as natural as the turning of the seasons. The initial awkwardness of my city-bred hands, accustomed to the smooth, unyielding surfaces of paper and polished wood, slowly gave way to a nascent competence. I learned to draw water from the well, the rope biting into my palms at first, then becoming a familiar friend. I learned to split kindling, the axe heavy and unwieldy, until Alara showed me the precise angle, the single clean strike that made the wood surrender. My muscles, once soft from long hours hunched over a desk, began to harden, to remember a primal strength I had forgotten I possessed. Spring arrived with a tentative blush of green, painting the hillsides with new life. Alara took me to the communal gardens, a patchwork of tilled earth, where the village grew its vegetables. Here, under the watchful eye of old Kale, whose gnarled hands seemed to possess an innate understanding of the soil, I learned to prepare the beds, to sow seeds, to recognize the first delicate shoots of what would become our food. Kale spoke little, his voice a gravelly murmur, but his lessons were profound. He taught me patience, the quiet art of observation, the understanding that growth cannot be rushed, only nurtured. I felt the cool, damp earth beneath my fingernails, the tiny seeds like promises held in my palm. Each planted seed was an act of faith, a hope for the future, a stark contrast to the sterile certainty of my former life. The village itself was a living entity, its pulse dictated by the sun and moon. Children, their laughter bright and unrestrained, played games in the dust, their bare feet hardened by summer. The older women sat outside their cottages, their fingers nimble as they mended clothes or braided reeds, their voices a low hum of gossip and shared stories. The men were often in the fields or the forest, their axes ringing or their tools clanking as they built or repaired. I became a part of this hum, no longer an observer but a participant. I helped mend a fence for old Lyra, whose eyesight was failing. I carried water for Finn, the blacksmith, whose forge roared like a hungry beast, his sweat-streaked face grinning as he shaped metal. I even learned to distinguish the calls of the various birds that nested in the eaves, their songs a constant soundtrack to our lives. The language, at first a confusing jumble of unfamiliar sounds, began to unravel its secrets. Lara, with her gentle corrections and patient repetitions, helped me navigate its nuances. I learned not just words, but the way they were strung together, the unspoken meanings, the rhythm of their speech. Soon I could understand the jokes shared over the evening meal, the worries exchanged between neighbors, the quiet comfort in a shared silence. My own voice, once hesitant, found its place among theirs, no longer a stranger's tongue. Summer brought longer days and a burst of vibrant activity. The fields ripened, golden, under the relentless sun. Harvest season was a communal effort, a joyous, back-breaking dance. We rose before dawn, the air still cool, and worked until dusk, our bodies aching but our spirits buoyed by the shared purpose. I learned to wield a scythe, its sharp blades singing through the stalks of grain, my movements becoming more fluid with each swing. I learned to bind sheaves, to stack them, to carry them to the threshing floor. The dust, the sweat, the smell of sun-baked earth and ripe grain, it all became a part of me. There was a profound satisfaction in seeing the fruits of our labor piled high, knowing that this was the sustenance that would carry us through the leaner months. Evenings were a time for stories around crackling fires, for simple songs accompanied by a rough-hewn lute, for shared meals that tasted all the sweeter for the day's toil. I found myself drawn to the elders, their eyes holding the weight of generations, their voices repositories of tales that wove together the history of the village, its triumphs and its tragedies, its connections to the land and the spirits that dwelled within it. They spoke of the ancient trees in the whispering forest, of the river that gave life and sometimes took it, of ancestors whose memories were kept alive in the stories passed down from parent to child. I listened, my mind a sponge, absorbing these threads of wisdom, feeling them knit into the fabric of my own understanding. There were moments, of course, when the old life flickered at the edges of my consciousness. A sudden scent, a particular turn of phrase, a memory of a distant city street. But these moments grew rarer, like faint echoes from a dream. The sharp edges of my past, once so present, began to soften, blurred by the relentless reality of the present. The anxieties that had once plagued me, the constant striving, the endless pursuit of some elusive success, seemed distant and irrelevant here. What mattered was the sun on my face, the feel of the earth beneath my feet, the shared laughter, the simple act of creating sustenance. Elara, more than anyone, was my anchor in this new world. Her presence was a steadying force, her wisdom a quiet wellspring. She saw things others missed, the subtle shifts in the wind, the unspoken worries in a villager's eyes, the hidden beauty in a gnarled root. She taught me to truly see, not just with my eyes, but with all my senses, to listen to the whispers of the forest, to feel the pulse of the river, to understand the language of the changing sky. She showed me how to read the patterns of the stars, not for navigation in some grand journey, but to know when to plant, when to harvest, when to prepare for the coming cold. It was a knowledge rooted in centuries of observation, a profound connection to the natural world that city life had utterly stripped from me. As autumn painted the landscape in fiery hues of red and gold, the pace of life shifted again. The last of the harvest was brought in, berries were gathered from the forest, and mushrooms, some edible, some deadly, were carefully identified under Elara's expert guidance. We spent long hours preserving, drying herbs, smoking meats, pickling vegetables, and making jams and jellies that filled the cellar with the sweet scent of summer's bounty. The air grew crisp, carrying the scent of wood smoke from the chimneys. The village prepared for winter, a time of quiet introspection and reliance on the stores we had painstakingly gathered. I learned the art of mending and weaving, my fingers, once clumsy, now capable of intricate work. Elara showed me how to spin wool, the rhythmic whir of the spindle a soothing sound. I found a surprising satisfaction in the creation of something tangible, something useful, from raw materials. A simple blanket, a sturdy basket, a repaired garment. Each item carried the weight of my effort, a small testament to my growing skill. Winter descended, a blanket of white silencing the world. The days grew short, the nights long and filled with the vast, cold silence of the snow-covered land. Life retreated indoors, gathering around the warmth of the hearth. This was a time for storytelling, for mending tools, for quiet crafts. I would sit by the fire, listening to the crackle and pop of the burning logs, my hands busy with some task, my mind at peace. The cold was a constant presence, but the warmth of the community, the shared meals, the simple camaraderie, kept it at bay. One particularly harsh winter, a fever swept through the village. It was not deadly, but it left many weak and unable to work. Elara, with her deep knowledge of herbs and remedies, became a beacon of hope. I assisted her, grinding herbs, brewing infusions, carrying warm broths to the sick. It was a time of fear and uncertainty, but also of profound unity. Villagers cared for one another, sharing what little they had, offering comfort and support. I saw the strength of this community, tested by adversity, and felt a fierce loyalty swell within me. My own past, with its isolated struggles, seemed a world away. Here, suffering was shared, and so was healing. Through these seasons, through these shared experiences, my sense of self underwent a quiet revolution. The name I had carried from the city, the titles, the expectations, they all began to shed like old skin. Here, I was simply me, known by my actions, by my willingness to help, by the way I learned and adapted. My value was not measured by wealth or status, but by my contribution to the common good, by the strength of my arms, the growing wisdom in my hands, the quiet presence I offered. The forest, which had initially seemed a dark and foreboding place, gradually revealed its secrets. Elara taught me to walk softly, to observe, to listen. She showed me how to identify tracking signs, the subtle prints of deer or fox in the mud, the gnawed bark of a rabbit, the rustle of a squirrel in the canopy. I learned which berries were safe to eat, which roots held sustenance, which leaves could soothe a sting or staunch a cut. The forest became not just a source of resources, but a place of profound beauty and quiet contemplation, its ancient trees standing as silent witnesses to the passage of time. I began to understand the village's reverence for the spirits of the forest, the river, the mountains. It was not a superstitious fear, but a deep respect for the interconnectedness of all things, a recognition that humans were but a small part of a much larger, intricate web of life. We took what we needed, but always with gratitude, always with an awareness of not taking too much. This philosophy, so alien to the relentless consumption of the city, resonated deeply within me. My hands, once delicate and uncalloused, now bore the marks of honest labor. My skin was tanned by the sun, my hair streaked with lighter shades from its constant exposure. My eyes, once accustomed to the artificial glow of lamps and the close confines of rooms, now saw with a sharper clarity, capable of discerning the distant flight of a hawk or the subtle shift in the weather. My body, once a vessel for my mind, now felt alive, strong, and deeply connected to the earth. The passage of time became less about dates on a calendar and more about the cycles of nature. The waxing and waning of the moon, the ebb and flow of the river, the dormancy and rebirth of the plants, these were the true markers of existence. My internal clock recalibrated, aligning itself with the natural world. I woke with the sun, slept with the moon, and found a deep, abiding peace in this simplicity. I often wondered, in those quiet moments before sleep or during a solitary walk in the woods, about the person I had been. That person seemed like a character from a forgotten book, a distant echo. The ambition, the intellectual pursuits, the social intricacies of my former life, they held no allure now. They felt like a cage, albeit a gilded one, from which I had unknowingly longed to escape. The freedom I found here was not the freedom of boundless choice, but the freedom of being truly present, of living in harmony with my surroundings, of contributing meaningfully to a community. Ilara sometimes spoke of the world beyond the village, of traders who occasionally passed through, bringing news and goods from distant lands. Her descriptions were always neutral, factual, devoid of judgment or longing. She seemed content with the world she inhabited, her wisdom a testament to its sufficiency. I, too, found myself less curious about the outside. My world had shrunk, but in shrinking it had deepened, become infinitely richer. One crisp autumn morning, as the leaves fell in a golden shower, I was helping Ilara gather medicinal herbs from a hidden dell deep in the forest. We worked in comfortable silence, the air sharp with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Ilara paused, her gaze fixed on a small patch of moss-covered stones. It was an ancient burial ground, she had told me once, a place of quiet reverence. She knelt, her fingers gently tracing the faded symbols on one of the stones. "You have found your way," she said, her voice soft, barely a whisper. "Your roots are growing deep here." I looked at her, then back at the stones, at the ancient trees that stood guard over the dell. A profound sense of belonging settled over me, warm and undeniable. It was not a temporary refuge, not a fleeting escape. This was home. The journey from the city, the initial fear and uncertainty, the long process of learning and adaptation, it had all led me to this moment, to this realization. I was no longer an outsider. I was part of the village, part of the forest, part of the rhythm of life that unfolded here. The thought brought with it a quiet joy, a sense of rightness that settled deep in my bones. There was no grand revelation, no sudden epiphany, but rather a slow, steady unfolding, like a flower turning its face to the sun. My hands, still stained with earth from digging roots, felt strong and capable. My heart, once burdened by unspoken anxieties, felt light and free. The world I had entered, so alien at first, had become my world, and I, in turn, had become a part of it. Winter came and went again, and then spring returned, painting the world anew. Each cycle brought a deeper understanding, a more profound connection. I knew the land intimately now, its moods, its secrets. I could predict the coming rain by the scent of the air, the distant rumble of thunder. I could tell which berries were ripe for picking, which mushrooms were safe to gather. My knowledge was no longer simply theoretical, it was embodied, lived. I began to take on more responsibility within the village. I helped organize the spring planting, drawing on the lessons I had learned from Kale. I assisted in mending the communal fishing nets, my fingers nimble with the intricate knots. When a child fell ill, it was often me Ilara sent to gather specific herbs, trusting my newfound botanical knowledge. I was no longer merely a student. I was becoming a contributor, a valued member of the community. The villagers, too, had changed in their interactions with me. The initial curiosity and polite distance had long since faded. Now there was an easy familiarity, a warmth that spoke of acceptance. They would seek my opinion on small matters, share their joys and sorrows, invite me to their hearths for an evening meal. I learned their family histories, their quirks, their dreams. I saw the quiet strength in their resilience, the deep love that bound them together. My relationship with Ilara had deepened into something akin to familial love. She was more than a mentor. She was a confidant, a silent observer of my transformation, a steady hand guiding me through the wilderness of my own self-discovery. We would often sit together in the evenings, by the fire, sharing a cup of herbal tea, speaking little, but understanding much. Her presence was a comfort, a reminder of the quiet strength that lay at the heart of this life. One evening, as a gentle rain pattered on the roof, Ilara spoke of my past, something she rarely did. She did not ask about the details, the specific events that had led me to their village, but rather about the feeling of it. The city, she said, her gaze fixed on the dancing flames. It held you. Her voice was soft, a whisper against the crackle of the fire. It held you, she repeated, not as a question, but as a statement of observed truth. Not with force, perhaps, but with a web of desires, of illusions. Her words hung in the air, echoing in the quiet space between us. A web of desires, of illusions. Yes, that resonated with a profound, almost painful accuracy. The city had been a grand illusionist, conjuring needs where none existed, presenting endless choices that all led down the same well-trodden path of acquisition and status. I had chased shadows, believing them to be substance. I had built walls around myself, thinking them fortifications when in reality they were cages. I looked into the flames, seeing not the familiar dance of wood and heat, but the flickering, restless energy of the city I had left behind. I saw the towering structures of glass and steel, reaching for a sky perpetually hazed by exhaust fumes, indifferent monoliths that cast long, cold shadows. I remembered the ceaseless thrum of traffic, a low, persistent growl that underscored every moment, a constant reminder of the world's frantic pace. The glare of neon lights, a false dawn that never faded, blurring the distinction between day and night, between work and rest. It held me, I murmured, my voice barely audible above the rain. It held me with the promise of something more, something better, always just out of reach. It fed me a steady diet of ambition, of competition, of the relentless pursuit of an ever-shifting goalpost. I thought I was free, choosing my own path, but in truth, I was simply running on a treadmill, convinced I was moving forward when all I did was stay in the same place, growing more tired with each stride. Ilara nodded slowly, her gaze still fixed on the fire, as if reading the story of my past in its depths. The city offers many things, she said, her voice gentle, but often it takes more than it gives. It promises connection, but delivers isolation. It offers power, but demands submission. Her words were like keys, unlocking chambers within me I had long sealed away. I remembered the faces in the crowd, a blur of hurried anonymity, each person a universe unto themselves, yet utterly disconnected from the next. The superficiality of interactions, the practiced smiles, the transactional nature of most relationships. Everyone was a potential stepping stone, a competitor, or a means to an end. Genuine connection was a luxury, a weakness even, in that environment. I had learned to wear a mask, to project an image of competence and indifference, to guard myself against the constant, subtle assaults of urban life. I felt a tightening in my chest, a phantom echo of the anxiety that had been my constant companion, the fear of falling behind, of being irrelevant, of not measuring up, the constant need to impress, to prove my worth, not just to others, but to myself. It was an exhausting performance, day in and day out. My worth was tied to my achievements, my possessions, my status. I was what I did, what I owned, not who I was. And somewhere along the way I had forgotten who I was. The silence in Ilara's home, broken only by the rain and the fire, felt like a balm. Here, my worth was measured by different metrics. My ability to mend a broken fence, to help with the harvest, to offer a listening ear to a troubled neighbor. My presence, not my performance, my genuine self, not a carefully constructed facade. I remember the noise, I continued, my voice gaining a little strength, as if shedding a burden, not just the traffic, but the constant chatter, the ringing phones, the blare of screens, the incessant demands on my attention. My mind was never quiet. It was always processing, planning, reacting. I sought solace in more noise, in music, in crowded places, anything to drown out the internal clamor that refused to be silenced. I was surrounded by people, yet I felt profoundly alone. My successes felt hollow, my joys fleeting. There was always a new peak to conquer, a new desire to satisfy. It was a hunger that could never be satiated. Alara turned her gaze from the fire to me, her eyes deep and knowing. She did not pity me, nor did she judge. There was only understanding, a quiet empathy that settled over me like a warm blanket. "And what did you seek when you left that place?" she asked, her voice still gentle, inviting, not demanding. I paused, searching for the words. Peace, I think. Or perhaps simply an absence of the noise, a space to breathe, a place where I could stop running. I had not known what I was running towards, only what I was running from. I had imagined some idyllic solitude, a quiet retreat where I could simply exist, unburdened. I had not anticipated finding a community, a connection, a new sense of belonging. I had not anticipated finding myself again, slowly, painstakingly, piece by piece, in the rhythm of this life. The city had promised endless choices, but it had narrowed my vision, forcing me into a specific mold. Here, in the village, the choices seemed fewer, simpler, yet they felt infinitely more profound. The choice to plant a seed, to nurture it, to harvest its bounty. The choice to share a meal, to listen to a story, to offer a helping hand. These were not choices driven by ambition or fear, but by genuine human need, by the natural cycle of life. I had been so busy in the city, so perpetually occupied, that I had forgotten how to simply be. I had forgotten the taste of real food, the feel of honest dirt beneath my fingernails, the warmth of the sun on my skin without the filter of glass. I had forgotten the simple joy of watching a seed sprout, of seeing the seasons turn, of knowing my place in the grand tapestry of life. The city had made me forget my own humanity, replacing it with a relentless drive for something artificial. Alara reached out, her hand resting lightly on my arm. "You are not alone in that journey," she said. "Many come to the mountains seeking what the city has stolen. Some find it, some do not. It depends on what they are willing to shed, and what they are willing to embrace. You," she squeezed my arm gently, "you have embraced the quiet. You have allowed the earth to speak to you again." Her words were a validation, a confirmation that I was on the right path, that the arduous journey of self-discovery was bearing fruit. I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me, for Alara, for this village, for the unexpected turn my life had taken. I had arrived here broken, adrift, a ghost of my former self. Now I felt whole, grounded, alive. The rain outside had softened to a gentle drizzle, a soothing murmur against the window pane. The fire continued its quiet dance, casting long, shifting shadows around the room. The conversation with Alara had not been a confrontation, but a catharsis. It had allowed me to articulate to myself as much as to her the profound chasm between my old life and my new one. It had solidified my understanding of why I had left and why I had stayed. The following days carried a new lightness. It was as if a final, lingering shadow of my past had been dispelled. I moved through my tasks with a renewed sense of purpose, a deeper appreciation for the simple acts that filled my days. When I helped old Master Theron mend a leaky section of his roof, the rhythmic tap of the hammer against the wood felt like a heartbeat, strong and steady. When I shared a midday meal of fresh bread and cheese with young Lena, whose laughter was as bright as the morning sun, I truly tasted the food, savored the moment. I found myself observing the villagers with fresh eyes, seeing their quiet strength, their interconnectedness, their unwavering spirit. Each person was a thread in the rich tapestry of this community, contributing their unique skills, their stories, their very presence. There was no need for grand gestures or performative displays. Simply being present, being reliable, being kind was enough. It was more than enough. I continued my lessons with Ilara, delving deeper into the village's history, its customs, its unspoken rules. She taught me about the subtle language of the forest, the signs that foretold a harsh winter or a bountiful, a show, a grand, unforgettable spectacle. The opportunity presented itself 6 months ago with an email from Sarah. She was engaged to Mark, a genuinely good guy she'd met through work. He was kind, earnest, and completely oblivious to the viper he was about to marry. The email was saccharine sweet, full of exclamation points and emojis, inviting me to be a bridesmaid. A bridesmaid. The audacity of it was almost comical. She wanted me, the sister whose life she'd systematically ruined, to stand beside her, smiling, as she embarked on her happily ever after. That email was the final piece of the puzzle. The perfect stage. The perfect audience. Her wedding. From that moment on, my life became a clandestine operation. I accepted the bridesmaid invitation with a forced smile and an even more forced enthusiasm. "Oh, Sarah," I said on the phone, "my heart genuinely happy for you, of course I'll be there." I even managed a few convincing tears of joy. She bought it, hook, line, and sinker. Sarah always did love a good performance, especially when she was the star. My planning was meticulous. I continued to gather evidence, not just for the banks, but for my own personal dossier. Every fraudulent statement, every credit report showing the damage, every email where she'd impersonated me, every text message where she'd gaslighted me. I organized it all, digitally and in a physical binder, cross-referencing dates, amounts, and specific instances. I even started recording some of our conversations, just in case. Though I knew those wouldn't be admissible in a court of law, they served as further confirmation for myself. I also started doing something I had never done before. I reached out to others, not to our parents. No, they were too far gone, but to other family members, distant cousins, aunts and uncles who weren't as blinded by Sarah's charm. I didn't tell them everything, not yet. I just started planting seeds of doubt, subtle observations about Sarah's spending habits, her lavish lifestyle that didn't quite add up to her stated income. I spoke in hypotheticals, carefully, always framing it as a concern for her, a worry about her financial well-being. It was a slow burn, but I needed to soften the ground, to create a fertile environment for the truth to land. The hardest part was maintaining the facade with Sarah. Every phone call, every dress fitting, every bridal shower was an exercise in emotional control. I smiled, I laughed, I offered suggestions for flowers and table settings. I even helped her choose her wedding dress, a stunning ivory gown that cost more than I made in 3 months. As she twirled in front of the mirror, her face alight with happiness, I felt a strange mixture of disgust and a perverse satisfaction. She was so oblivious, so wrapped up in her own world, that she couldn't see the storm brewing right beside her. Mark, her fiancé, was another challenge. He was genuinely harvest. She showed me how to read the patterns of the stars, not for navigation, but for understanding the cyclical nature of time, the ebb and flow of life. Her wisdom was not academic. It was lived, breathed, woven into the very fabric of her being. One afternoon, as we gathered herbs in a sun-dappled clearing, Ilara paused, her hand brushing against the soft leaves of a plant I did not recognize. "This one," she said, her voice thoughtful, "is called Forget-Me-Not by some, though its true name is more ancient. It is said to help the heart remember what it truly cherishes, to clear away the dust of distraction." She plucked a few leaves, crushing them gently between her fingers, releasing a subtle, earthy scent. "You have remembered much," she continued, looking at me with those knowing eyes. "You have remembered the quiet strength that resides within you, the connection to the earth, the joy of simple truths. The city tried to make you forget, but the forest, it remembers. I smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached my eyes. It felt good to be seen, to be understood, to have my journey acknowledged, not as a failure of my past life, but as a triumph of my spirit. I had not forgotten the city entirely, of course. Bits of it still surfaced in my dreams, sometimes as a frantic chase, other times as a muted, melancholic longing for something I could no longer define. But the vividness had faded, replaced by a clarity that allowed me to view it as a distant landscape, a part of my story, but no longer the defining chapter. My hands, once accustomed to keyboards and touchscreens, were now calloused and strong, comfortable with the heft of an axe, the feel of damp soil, the delicate touch required for harvesting berries. My mind, once cluttered with deadlines and projections, now found peace in the rhythmic swing of a scythe, the intricate patterns of a weaving loom, the patient wait for a fish to bite. My senses, once dulled by artificial stimuli, were now attuned to the subtle shifts in the wind, the distant cry of a hawk, the sweet scent of blooming wildflowers. The change had been gradual, almost imperceptible day by day, but looking back, it was monumental. I was no longer merely surviving, I was living. I was no longer a stranger in my own skin. I was home. The wilderness of my own self-discovery, as Alara had once called it, was no longer a daunting, untamed landscape, but a familiar, beloved terrain, filled with hidden springs and sunlit clearings. The quiet strength that lay at the heart of this life had become my own. I had shed the brittle armor of the city, piece by painful piece, and in its place, a resilient core had grown, nurtured by the earth, by the community, by the profound simplicity of existence. I was no longer seeking something. I had found it. It was not a destination, but a way of being, a continuous unfolding. Winter approached, bringing with it a hushed beauty. The air grew crisp, carrying the scent of wood smoke and pine. The days shortened, drawing us closer to the warmth of our hearths. The villagers gathered their stores, preparing for the long months ahead, their movements imbued with a practiced efficiency and a quiet camaraderie. I joined them, hauling logs, salting meat, weaving baskets for storage. Each task, no matter how small, felt significant, a vital part of the collective effort. The children, bundled in warm clothes, chased each other through the fallen leaves, their laughter echoing through the crisp air, a reminder of the enduring joy that permeated even the coldest seasons. I watched them, a pang of something akin to wistfulness, but also a deep contentment, settling in my chest. This life, with all its challenges and its profound rewards, was mine. It was the life I had unknowingly yearned for, the life that had called to me across vast distances, across the chasm of my own lost self. One evening, as the first flakes of snow began to fall, dusting the world in a soft, ethereal white, I sat by the fire with Alara. We did not speak of the past, nor of the future. We simply sat, sharing the quiet warmth, listening to the gentle hiss of the snow against the window. The silence was not empty. It was full, brimming with understanding, with peace, with the unspoken language of shared existence. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I was exactly where I was meant to be. The journey had been long, the path winding and often uncertain, but it had led me home. And home, I realized, was not a place on a map, but a feeling, a state of being, a connection to something far greater than myself. It was in the quiet strength of the mountains, the gentle wisdom of Alara, the unwavering spirit of the villagers, and in the rediscovered depths of my own heart. The city's grip had long since loosened, replaced by the embrace of a life truly lived. The snow continued to fall through the night, blanketing the world in a profound hush. Morning light, filtered through the thick white cover, painted the cabin in soft, diffused hues. I awoke not to the jarring clamor of alarms, but to the gentle crackle of the fire Elara had already stoked, and the scent of brewing herbal tea. Each day unfolded with a similar grace, a rhythm dictated by the sun and the seasons, not by the relentless tick of a clock. Years melted into a tapestry of shared moments. We watched spring burst forth with vibrant wildflowers, felt the summer sun warm our skin as we tended the small garden, gathered provisions in the crisp air of autumn, and found solace in the deep quiet of winter. My hands, once accustomed to the sterile touch of a keyboard, now knew the rough texture of wood, the yielding earth, the warmth of a freshly baked loaf. The lines etched on my face were no longer signs of stress, but maps of a life lived fully, each wrinkle a testament to laughter, contemplation, and the quiet joy of presence. Elara's gaze, often distant yet always understanding, was a constant anchor. Her wisdom was not spoken in grand pronouncements, but in the way she moved, the patience with which she listened, the simple truths she embodied. We were two rivers, once separate, now flowing together, enriching the landscape of each other's lives. The villagers, too, had become family, their stories intertwining with my own, creating a strong, resilient fabric of community. The search for my lost self had ended not with a dramatic discovery, but with a gradual unfolding, like a flower turning towards the light. I had not found a new identity, but rather remembered the one that had always been there, buried beneath layers of expectation and artificiality. The mountains had stripped away the superfluous, revealing the essential. Here, in the heart of this enduring wilderness, surrounded by love and quiet purpose, I understood that true belonging was not about finding a place to fit in, but about finding the place where your soul could finally breathe. It was a peace that resonated through every cell, a quiet, profound knowing that this was, and always would be, home. The seasons turned, each bringing new lessons and familiar comforts. Spring painted the valleys with vibrant hues, summer hummed with the labor of harvest, autumn set the peaks ablaze with color, and winter wrapped everything in a serene, profound silence. My hands, once accustomed to screens and sterile surfaces, now knew the rough feel of timber, the cool dampness of soil, the warmth of a freshly baked loaf. They were hands that built, nurtured, and created, reflecting a heart that had finally found its true rhythm. Elara and I, our bond deepening with every shared sunrise and starlit night, moved through our days with an unspoken understanding. Her wisdom, gentle yet firm, continued to be a compass, guiding us both through the challenges and joys of mountain life. The children of the village, growing taller with each passing year, often sought me out for stories, their innocent questions a reminder of the simple wonders life offered. I found myself sharing tales not of my past struggles, but of the resilience of the mountains, the quiet wisdom of the elders, and the unbreakable strength found in unity. There was no grand future I yearned for, no distant shore to reach, only the profound contentment of the present moment, the quiet assurance that I was exactly where I was meant to be. The air itself seemed to carry the scent of belonging, a blend of pine, wood smoke, and the earthy fragrance of the land after rain. My spirit, once restless and fragmented, now settled, like a stone finding its perfect, immutable place in a riverbed. This was not an end, but a continuous, gentle beginning, a lifelong unfolding of a self lived in harmony with the world and with its own deepest truth. The journey had not ceased. It had merely transformed, from a frantic search to a joyful, purposeful walk. Every breath was a thank you, every heartbeat a confirmation. I was home, and the peace of it was boundless. The days unfolded with a quiet grace, each sunrise a fresh affirmation of this rediscovered self. The seasons turned, bringing their own gentle rhythms to the valley, and with them, a deeper understanding of the interconnectedness of all things. I learned to read the subtle language of the wind through the pines, the stories etched into the ancient rocks, the silent wisdom held within the earth itself. My past, once a heavy cloak, had dissolved into the mist of forgotten anxieties, leaving behind only the distilled essence of lessons learned. There was no need to seek further horizons, for the truest frontier was within, a vast and peaceful landscape I now inhabited fully. The quiet hum of existence, the steady beat of my own heart in concert with the world. This was the song of my unending home. It was a peace that settled not just in the mind, but in the very marrow of my bones, a timeless, gentle embrace that would forever define me. The culmination of this journey was not a destination reached, but a state of being fully embraced. The world outside reflected the quietude within. The mountains stood as silent sentinels, echoing the strength I had found. The river flowed with a ceaseless rhythm. A melody that now echoed the very pulse of my existence. I had ceased to search for grand revelations, understanding that true wisdom lay in the unadorned beauty of each passing moment. This transformation was not a sudden epiphany, but a gradual weaving of self with the vast tapestry of the world. The strength I had discovered was not of defiance, but of profound acceptance, a quiet resilience born from surrendering to the natural flow. My spirit, once a restless current, had found its wide, still lake, reflecting the endless sky. There was no final destination to reach, only this sustained state of grace, a calm abiding in the heart of all things. The quietude I carried was now an inseparable part of me, a beacon guiding each breath, each step, into an ever-deepening harmony with life itself. This was the true homecoming, a boundless peace. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a masterpiece unfolding just for me, yet for everyone. I breathed it in, a part of the vastness, no longer a separate observer, but an integrated thread in the cosmic design. The river's song continued, carrying whispers of eternity through the twilight air. My journey had not ended, for it had become the journey itself, a perpetual dance with existence, each step a further embrace of the unknown. Each moment was a gentle unfolding, a soft surrender to the intricate beauty of being. The world was no longer something to conquer or understand, but something to simply be within, to merge with, to celebrate. And in that merging, and I found myself feeling a pang of guilt. He didn't deserve to be caught in the crossfire. But then I reminded myself that he was choosing to marry Sarah, and while he might not know the extent of her deceit, he was about to tie his life to someone who had systematically destroyed mine. Perhaps, in a twisted way, I was doing him a favor. He deserved to know who he was truly marrying. My strategy was simple. Undeniable proof, delivered publicly, with maximum impact. I considered a variety of methods. A dramatic speech? Too cliché. A video presentation? Too easily dismissed as doctored? No, it had to be something tangible, something they could hold, something that spoke for itself. I settled on a multi-pronged approach, designed to hit her from every angle. First, the physical evidence. I had prepared a series of carefully selected documents. Credit reports highlighting the fraudulent accounts, bank statements showing her spending on those accounts, copies of loan agreements she'd signed in my name. These weren't just any documents. They were the most damning, the ones that screamed fraud. Second, the digital evidence. I had created a secure, anonymous website, a simple page, with a single, clear purpose. On it, I had uploaded scanned copies of all the physical documents, high-resolution images that were impossible to refute. I also included screenshots of emails where she'd impersonated me, and even a few of those recorded phone calls, edited to highlight her denials and gaslighting. The website was clean, professional, and devastatingly effective. The final piece was the delivery mechanism. I couldn't just stand up and shout. It needed to be elegant, shocking, and impossible to ignore. and it needed to be delivered to everyone present, not just a select few. The wedding invitations had been beautiful, embossed with Sarah's chosen floral motif. I had taken one, carefully, weeks ago, and used it as a template. I then designed a small, discreet card, the same size and shape as a standard business card, but without any branding. On one side, in elegant, understated script, it simply read, "A message for the guests of Sarah and Mark." On the other side, in slightly smaller font, was the URL for my website. No explanation, no sensational headlines, just the cold, hard link. My job as a bridesmaid gave me unprecedented access. I was involved in every step of the planning. I knew the seating chart, the guest list, the flow of the ceremony and reception. I knew where the programs would be placed, where the favors would be, where the guest book would sit, and I knew exactly when and how I would distribute my little cards. The week leading up to the wedding was a blur of nervous energy and a strange, almost serene calm. I felt like a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. Every detail was accounted for. I'd even considered the possibility of security, but Sarah's wedding was a family affair, not a high-profile event that would warrant pat-downs. Besides, who would suspect the quiet, supportive older sister? Last night, I'd slipped away from the rehearsal dinner early, feigning a headache. I spent hours in my hotel room, meticulously arranging the cards. I had printed hundreds of them, enough for every guest, plus extras. I placed them in small, discreet velvet pouches, easy to carry, easy to distribute without drawing attention. Now, standing here in this ridiculously opulent hotel suite, the city lights winking outside, I took a deep, steadying breath. Tomorrow was the day. The day I stopped being a victim and started being the author of my own narrative again. The lilies still smelled cloying, but beneath it, I could almost detect the faint, metallic tang of impending change. My phone buzzed. It was Sarah, a text message. "Can't wait for tomorrow, sis. So glad you're here. Love you." I stared at the words, a ghost of a smile playing on my lips. "Love you too, Sarah," I typed back, and then added a heart emoji. The performance was almost over. The morning dawned crisp and clear, a perfect late summer day, the kind of day that seemed tailor-made for a fairy tale wedding. The air was buzzing with an almost palpable excitement. Hair and makeup artists swarmed the bridal suite, transforming already beautiful women into goddesses. Sarah, of course, was the brightest star, radiating an almost blinding joy. She was absolutely stunning in her dress, her hair swept up in an elegant chignon, her eyes sparkling. She looked like she belonged on the cover of a bridal magazine. I watched her, a knot of complex emotions twisting in my gut. Part of me, the old me, the sister who once adored her, felt a pang of genuine sorrow for what was about to happen. She truly believed this was her moment, her unblemished beginning. But the other part, the part that had been forged in the fires of betrayal and financial ruin, felt nothing but a cold, hard satisfaction. This was her moment, yes, but not in the way she imagined. My role was simple: be the picture of the dutiful, loving bridesmaid. I helped her with her veil, adjusted her train, fetched her champagne, and offered reassuring words. My smile felt painted on, but apparently it was convincing enough. My performance was flawless, a testament to years of practice in masking my true feelings, a skill honed in the crucible of our family's unraveling. I adjusted Sarah's delicate lace glove, my fingers brushing hers. Her skin felt warm, vibrant. Mine, I knew, was cold, even through the thin fabric. The photographer called for more shots, directing Sarah to gaze out the window, to laugh with her bridesmaids, to share a tender moment with our mother, who hovered nearby, teary-eyed and beaming. Each click of the camera was a hammer blow against the fragile peace I pretended to inhabit. Every radiant smile Sarah bestowed upon the lens was a reminder of the life she had so carelessly dismantled, a life she now believed she was escaping, leaving me in its ruins. My mother, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath my placid exterior, patted my arm. She remarked on how lovely I looked, how supportive a sister I was. I managed a small, tight smile in response, a silent promise that her perception would soon be shattered, along with Sarah's perfect day. Our mother had always favored Sarah, seeing her as the golden child, the one destined for greatness, while I was merely the quiet, sensible one. This partiality had been another splinter in my heart, festering over the years, contributing to the resentment that now burned so brightly. The time finally came for us to descend. The grand staircase of the hotel, usually a backdrop for mundane business transactions, had been transformed into a fairy tale ascent, adorned with garlands of white roses and flowing silk. Sarah paused at the top, a vision of ethereal beauty. Her eyes met mine, and for a fleeting second I saw a flicker of our shared past. A memory of childhood dreams whispered in the dark, of promises made beneath a canopy of stars. A wave of nausea washed over me, a battle between the girl who loved her sister and the woman who sought retribution. The woman won. She took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling beneath the intricate bodice of her gown. Her fiancé Julian awaited her at the altar, a man whose charm was as polished as his expensive shoes, a man whose secrets I had painstakingly unearthed. He represented everything Sarah now valued: status, wealth, a superficial perfection, and he too was a piece in my intricate game. The procession began. First, the flower girls, scattering petals with innocent abandon, then the junior bridesmaids, and finally, me. My steps were measured, deliberate. Each footfall echoed not just on the carpeted stairs, but in the chambers of my own resolve. I held my bouquet tightly, the delicate scent of lilies doing little to calm the thrumming anticipation in my veins. My gaze swept over the assembled guests, faces of friends, family, business associates, all gathered to witness Sarah's triumph. They were all complicit, in their way, in the narrative of her success, the narrative I was about to rewrite. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I took my place, waiting for Sarah's grand entrance. The music swelled, a majestic classical piece that filled the air with a sense of momentous occasion. Then she appeared, framed in the archway, bathed in the soft light, filtering through the stained-glass windows. A collective gasp rippled through the room. She truly was breathtaking. Even I, in my hardened state, could not deny her beauty. Her father, a man whose broken trust I still mourned, offered her his arm, his face a mixture of pride and paternal love. He had been the first casualty of Sarah's ambition, his business, our family's legacy, crumbling under the weight of her reckless financial decisions. He walked her down the aisle, a slow, deliberate march towards what she believed was her salvation. My eyes found Julian, standing tall and handsome at the altar, his smile a practiced, confident curve. He met Sarah's gaze, a look of adoration plastered on his face. I knew better. I knew the hollow core beneath that polished exterior, the desperation that drove him, the flimsy foundations of his supposed fortune. The ceremony began, a blur of familiar words and sacred vows. The officiant spoke of love, commitment, and lifelong partnership. Sarah and Julian exchanged rings, their hands clasped together, a picture of perfect harmony. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat counting down the seconds. The plan was meticulously timed, a precise strike at the zenith of her joy. I had arranged for a discreet, yet unavoidable interruption. Not a grand theatrical spectacle, for that was not my style. My revenge was colder, more insidious, designed to unravel her carefully constructed world from within. It would be delivered by an impersonal force, a bureaucratic hammer blow, leaving no doubt as to its authenticity, and no one to blame but the truth itself. The officiant reached the part where he asked if anyone present knew of any reason why these two should not be lawfully wed. A hush fell over the room, as it always does at this point, a moment of traditional suspense. My breath hitched. This was it. Just as the officiant was about to continue, a subtle chime echoed through the venue's sound system, a chime designed to announce important messages during events. It was not the usual wedding announcement tone. A low murmur spread through the guests. A voice, calm and professional, then spoke over the loudspeakers. It announced that due to unforeseen and extremely serious financial irregularities, specifically related to the assets and liabilities of Mr. Julian Vance and Miss Sarah Davies, and in light of recent legal filings, the State Registrar's Office was compelled to inform all parties that the legal validity of any marriage contracted today between these individuals could be immediately challenged and potentially voided. The voice went on to state that a full audit and investigation into allegations of substantial fraud and money laundering had been initiated, and that both parties were advised to seek immediate legal counsel. It concluded by stating that official documents would be delivered to the venue within the hour, confirming these proceedings. The words hung in the air, cold and stark, stripping away the warmth and romance of the moment. The silence that followed was deafening. A vacuum where joy had been. My heart, which had been pounding, now felt strangely still. Sarah's face, moments ago radiant with happiness, crumpled. Her eyes, wide with disbelief, searched for Julian's, then for mine. Julian, initially frozen, now looked like a trapped animal, his face draining of all color. His practiced smile had vanished, replaced by a mask of terror. My mother let out a small, choked cry. Our father, who had been standing next to Sarah, swayed slightly, his hand clutching her arm. The guests, initially murmuring, now began to whisper more loudly, their faces a mixture of shock, confusion, and dawning understanding. Sarah's voice, when it came, was a barely audible gasp, a question directed at Julian. She asked him what that meant, her eyes pleading for reassurance. Julian, however, could only stammer, his usual smooth composure utterly shattered. He tried to speak, but no coherent words emerged, only disjointed phrases about misunderstandings and legal technicalities. The officiant, clearly flustered, looked from Julian to Sarah, then to the guests, entirely unsure how to proceed. The carefully choreographed perfection of the day had been irrevocably shattered. I stood there, a silent observer, my painted smile finally feeling genuine, though twisted with a bitter satisfaction. The cold, hard part of me watched Sarah's world collapse, piece by agonizing piece. The sorrowful pang from earlier was gone, drowned out by the crescendo of my vindication. Sarah turned to me, her eyes accusing, desperate. She asked if I knew anything about this, her voice laced with a raw edge of suspicion. I met her gaze, offering nothing but a blank expression. My role, I reminded myself, was still the dutiful bridesmaid, bewildered by this unexpected turn of events. I simply shook my head slowly, feigning confusion, a silent lie that felt like a truth in its own right. Julian, meanwhile, was already making his move. His gaze darted around the room, not at Sarah, but at the exits. He took a step back from the altar, then another, a predator caught in a snare. Sarah, seeing his reaction, let out a heart-wrenching sob, a sound that cut through the stunned silence. She called his name, a desperate plea, but he was already turning, his escape instinct overriding any pretense of devotion. The guests watched, horrified, as Julian practically bolted from the altar, pushing past confused ushers and bewildered relatives. He disappeared through a side door, leaving Sarah utterly abandoned, a beautiful bride standing alone in the ruins of her wedding day. My mother rushed to Sarah's side, enveloping her in a tearful embrace. Our father, his face etched with pain, looked utterly defeated. The dream of his golden daughter's perfect life had just imploded before his very eyes. The officiant, regaining some semblance of authority, tried to calm the room, suggesting that perhaps the ceremony should be paused or postponed. His words were futile. The magic was gone. The festive atmosphere had curdled into one of scandal and despair. I remained in my position, a statue of quiet observation. My revenge was complete, or at least its most public and devastating phase. The initial shock was giving way to an ugly murmur among the guests. Some looked horrified, others scandalized, and a few, I noticed, wore expressions of thinly veiled schadenfreude. Sarah had made many enemies in her ascent, stepping on more than a few people to get what she wanted. Now they were witnessing her downfall. Sarah pulled away from our mother, her tear-streaked face a mask of utter devastation. She looked around the room, her eyes darting from face to face, seeing the pity, the judgment, the gossip already forming on their lips. Her gaze landed on me again, and this time, there was no mistaking the raw accusation in her eyes. She must have seen something in my composure, a lack of shared grief, a subtle hint of triumph that I hadn't entirely managed to mask. Her voice, broken and hoarse, reached me. She asked me again, this time with more certainty, if I had done this. My heart gave a strange lurch. Had I underestimated her? Had she always known the darkness that simmered beneath my surface? I held her gaze, a silent battle of wills. I offered no denial, no affirmation, just a steady, unwavering stare. In that moment, the years of resentment, the financial ruin, the betrayal, all coalesced into a single potent force. I had promised myself I would not gloat, that I would maintain my detached facade. But a flicker, a small, almost imperceptible curl of my lip, might have betrayed me. The official documents arrived precisely as the announcement had promised. A stern-faced woman in a business suit entered the venue, carrying a thick folder. She approached the altar, her gaze cutting through the disarray, and handed a sheaf of papers to the officiant, then another set to our father, who reluctantly accepted them. The room grew silent once more, watching this grim, bureaucratic epilogue to a dream. Sarah stumbled backwards, her beautiful dress now a symbol of her shattered hopes. She sank onto the steps of the altar, her face buried in her hands, her body racked with silent sobs. The sight should have evoked pity, but for me, it was merely the final scene of a long-awaited play. The cost of her ambition, her greed, her casual disregard for others, was finally being tallied. My mother, distraught, tried to comfort Sarah, stroking her hair, whispering reassurances that sounded hollow in the echo of the recent announcement. Our father, reading through the documents, let out a groan of despair. I knew what those papers contained. Irrefutable evidence of Julian Vance's fraudulent dealings, his shell corporations, his elaborate Ponzi scheme, and Sarah's complicity in it. Her eager investment of our family's remaining assets, the final nail in the coffin of our father's business. I had ensured that the investigation into Julian would expose Sarah's involvement, not as a victim, but as an active participant, blinded by avarice and a desperate desire for social ascent. My work was done. The seeds of ruin I had carefully planted had blossomed into a bitter harvest. I watched the scene unfold, the shattered remnants of what was supposed to be the happiest day of Sarah's life. The expensive flowers, the lavish decorations, the untouched feast awaiting in the protocole,